Could two people who've spent years building walls around their hearts ever tear them down for each other, or would they simply collide and shatter into pieces too sharp to ever put back together? The airport terminal was drowning in the chaos of 1,000 intersecting lives. Announcements echoed off cold marble floors. Children wailed. Lovers embraced. Business travelers stared blankly at departure screens, their faces illuminated by artificial light that made everyone look slightly dead. And there, at gate 47, sitting 3 seats apart, were two people who had perfected the art of being alone in crowded rooms. She sat with her shoulders angled toward the window, even though there was nothing to see beyond her own reflection, staring back at her from the darkness outside. Her laptop was open, fingers moving across the keys with mechanical precision, but if anyone had looked closely, they would have noticed she'd been typing the same sentence over and over again for the past 10 minutes. Her name was Eleanor Marsh, 32 years old, corporate litigator, winner of cases that would have broken lesser attorneys. She wore her armor well, a charcoal suit that fit like it was sculpted onto her frame, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and an expression that could freeze lava mid-flow. 3 seats away, he sat with his head tilted back against the wall, eyes closed, noise-canceling headphones creating a barrier between himself and humanity. Marcus Chen, 34, architect specializing in brutalist structures, buildings that look like they were designed to withstand nuclear war and emotional vulnerability in equal measure. His jaw was set in a permanent clench, the kind that dentists warn about. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of a black wool coat, fingers curled into fists even in rest. Neither of them noticed each other. They had both perfected the skill of not noticing. The flight was delayed. Of course it was. Chicago to Seattle, a simple journey that now stretched into an indefinite purgatory of waiting. Hours crawled by. The terminals slowly emptied as other flights departed, leaving only the stranded passengers of Flight 2847, their collective frustration thickening the air. It was somewhere around midnight when the announcement came: mechanical failure. The flight was cancelled, hotels were full, there was a medical conference in town. The airline would provide vouchers, but most passengers would be sleeping in the terminal. A collective groan rippled through the gate area. Elena snapped her laptop shut with enough force to make nearby passengers flinch. She stood, smoothed her already perfect suit, and walked with military precision toward the service desk. Marcus opened his eyes slowly, watching her march away with the grim fascination of someone observing a missile headed toward its target. 20 minutes later, she returned. The composure had developed hairline fractures. She dropped back into her seat, not 3 seats away this time, but 5, and pulled out her phone, stabbing at the screen with barely controlled fury. "They're useless," she muttered, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough that the words carried. Marcus surprised himself by responding. "The airline or humanity in general?" She turned her head slowly, her gaze landing on him like a sniper's scope finding its mark. For a moment, he thought she might tell him to mind his own business. For a moment, he hoped she would, because then he could go back to his carefully maintained isolation. But instead, something flickered in her eyes. Something that looked almost like recognition, though they'd never met before in their lives. "Both," she said finally. "Definitely both." He almost smiled. Almost. The corner of his mouth twitched in a way that could have been interpreted as amusement or indigestion. Fair assessment. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been. They were two strangers who had just acknowledged each other's existence in a world where they both preferred to remain invisible. An hour passed, then another. The terminal lights seemed to grow harsher, more clinical. Most of the other passengers had claimed sections of seats, curling up under jackets and coats, trying to manufacture sleep from sheer exhaustion. But Elena and Marcus remained awake, maintained their posts like sentries guarding against something neither could name. It was Elena who spoke next, her voice cutting through the artificial quiet of the sleeping terminal. Do you ever feel like you're running towards something or away from something, but you can't quite tell which? The question hung in the air between them, so raw and unexpected that Marcus actually turned his head to look at her fully for the first time. Her profile was sharp against the dim light, and there was something in the set of her jaw that he recognized immediately. The look of someone who had just surprised themselves by telling the truth. "Every day," he said, and his voice was rougher than he'd intended. "Every single day." She turned to meet his eyes then, and something passed between them in that moment. Not attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when two people realize they've been fighting the same war on different battlefields. "I'm Elena." "Marcus." No handshake, no false pleasantries, just names exchanged like treaty terms between wary nations. "What are you running from?" she asked, and there was a recklessness in the question, the kind that only emerges at midnight in fluorescent-lit purgatories when all the normal rules of engagement seem suspended. He should have deflected, should have made a joke or changed the subject or put his headphones back on and retreated into silence. Instead, he said, "The last person who tried to love me." The honesty of it seemed to shock them both. Elena's eyes widened fractionally, and Marcus looked away, jaw clenching even tighter. But Elena didn't retreat. If anything, she leaned forward slightly, like someone who had just found a familiar weapon on a battlefield. "Did you break their heart, or did they break yours?" "Both," he said, "at the same time. Turns out you can destroy each other mutually if you both try hard enough." She nodded slowly, and he could see her processing this, filing it away. "I haven't let anyone close enough to break anything in 6 years," she said. "Safer that way." "Is it?" "I thought so." She paused, studying him with an intensity that should have made him uncomfortable. "Until about 5 minutes ago." And there it was, the moment, the crack in the ice, the first spark in the darkness. Neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. The terminal lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a cleaning crew was pushing industrial mops across endless corridors of tile. But in that small cluster of seats at Gate 47, two people who had built their entire lives around not feeling anything were suddenly feeling everything. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, an announcement shattered the moment. A mechanical voice crackled through the speakers, announcing that a backup aircraft had been located. Flight 2847 would board in 45 minutes. The sleeping passengers stirred like the dead awakening, gathering their belongings with zombie-like determination. But Marcus and Elena remained frozen, caught in the gravity of what had just passed between them. "We should," Elena started. "Yeah," Marcus interrupted, but neither of them moved. The spell should have broken. The moment should have dissolved into the awkward shuffle of strangers retreating to their separate corners. But something had shifted in the air between them, something that felt dangerous and inevitable in equal measure. Elena stood first, slinging her leather bag over her shoulder with practiced efficiency. She took 3 steps toward the gate before stopping, her back still to him. Marcus watched the war play out in the rigid line of her spine, the instinct to walk away battling against something else, something newer and far more terrifying. She turned around. "I'm in seat 12A, she said, her voice carefully neutral, as if she was simply stating a fact about weather patterns or stock prices. "The flight is 3 hours and 17 minutes. Marcus felt his heart do something it hadn't done in years. It accelerated with hope. 12B, he said. Apparently. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "What are the odds?" "Astronomical," he replied, "or inevitable. Depends on what you believe in." "I don't believe in anything," she said. But the words sounded less like a statement and more like a challenge. "Neither do I," he answered. "But here we are." The boarding process was chaos. Families struggled with oversized luggage. A businessman argued loudly about overhead bin space. Flight attendants smiled with the strained patience of people who had long ago stopped finding humanity charming. Marcus and Eleanor moved through it all like ghosts, hyper-aware of each other's presence, careful not to touch even as they navigated the narrow aisle to row 12. The seats were designed for maximum passenger capacity and minimum human comfort. Their shoulders touched immediately, unavoidably. Elena pulled away as if burned, angling herself toward the window. Marcus pressed himself against the armrest on his side, creating a border of empty air between them that felt more like a chasm. The plane taxied. Safety demonstrations were performed. The woman in row 11 reclined her seat aggressively, and still, neither of them spoke. It was only after takeoff, when the cabin lights dimmed and the engine settled into its monotonous roar, that Elena's voice cut through the darkness. Her name was Sarah. Marcus turned his head slightly, waiting. She was brilliant, Elena continued, staring at the window even though there was nothing visible but blackness and the occasional blinking wing light. Astrophysicist. She could explain the death of stars in a way that made you feel like you understood the universe. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. She wanted to get married, wanted kids, wanted a house with a garden and Sunday mornings reading the paper together. All the normal things that normal people want. But you didn't, Marcus said quietly. I wanted to make partner. I wanted to win the Reichman case. I wanted to be the best attorney in the city, in the state, in the entire goddamn country. Her fingers were gripping the armrest so hard her knuckles had gone white. And I was so sure that those things were mutually exclusive, that I couldn't be soft and sharp at the same time, that love would dull the edge I'd spent my whole life sharpening. Did you love her? The question sat between them for a long moment. Yes, Elena finally whispered. That was the problem. Marcus absorbed this, understanding it in a way that made his chest ache. What happened? I came home one day and she was gone. No note, no explanation. Just empty closets and a key on the kitchen counter. Elena turned to look at him then, and her eyes were dry but devastated. I spent 6 months trying to find her, to explain, to fix it. Finally tracked her down in Arizona. She'd married someone else, a kindergarten teacher, someone who knew how to be gentle. I'm sorry, Marcus said, and meant it. Your turn, Elena said, and there was a rawness to her voice that suggested she needed to hear she wasn't alone in her destruction. Marcus leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. His name was David, photographer. He saw beauty in everything, broken windows, graffiti, the way light hit garbage in alleyways. He saw beauty in me too, which should have been my first warning. Elena waited, giving him the same space he'd given her. We lived together for 4 years. It was... Marcus paused, searching for the word. It was good. Easy even. Until it wasn't. He wanted me to quit my job, said the work was killing something inside me. Said every building I designed looked like a mausoleum, and maybe I was building monuments to dead things because I was afraid of living ones. Was he right? Completely. Marcus opened his eyes, staring at the seat in front of him. But I couldn't stop. The work was the only thing that made sense. Buildings don't change their minds. Concrete doesn't decide one day that it wants something different. I could control every line, every angle, every goddamn brick. But not him, Elena said. Not him. Marcus's jaw clenched. He gave me an ultimatum. The work or him. Choose. And you chose the work. I chose fear, Marcus corrected. I chose the thing that couldn't hurt me. And in doing so, I hurt him worse than I'd hurt anyone in my life. Watched him pack his cameras, his clothes, all those pictures he'd taken of us when we were still happy. He cried. I couldn't. It was like I'd forgotten how. The plane hit turbulence. A sudden drop that made passengers gasp, but Marcus and Elena barely noticed. They were tumbling through different turbulence entirely. "Do you ever wonder," Elena said slowly, "if we broke ourselves by breaking them? If we traded the ability to feel anything for the illusion of control?" Marcus turned to face her fully, and in the dim cabin light, her face looked younger, more vulnerable than he'd thought possible. "Every day," he said, "but wondering doesn't fix anything, and I don't know how to unbreak what's broken." "Me neither." She held his gaze. "But I also don't know why I'm telling you things I haven't told anyone, why you feel like you've known me before," he finished. "Yes." They were still staring at each other when the flight attendant appeared, asking about drinks in a voice that suggested she'd already asked once and been ignored. Elena ordered whiskey. Marcus did the same. They drank in silence, the alcohol burning pathways through the ice they'd built inside themselves. It was Marcus who spoke next. "What if," he began, then stopped, then forced himself to continue. "What if people like us, people who've built walls so high they can't see the sky anymore, what if we're not meant to be fixed by someone gentle?" Elena's eyebrows raised slightly. "What do you mean?" Sarah sounds like she was sunshine. David was. He was hope personified. They were good people who deserved good people. He swirled the whiskey in the plastic cup. "But maybe people like us need someone who understands darkness. Someone who won't try to drag us into the light, but will sit with us in the shadows until we remember why we built those walls in the first place." "And then what?" Elena challenged. "We just, what? Accept that we're damaged and call it romance?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "We accept that we're damaged and decide whether we want to stay that way." The words hung between them like a proposition, like a dare, like a question neither of them knew how to answer. Elena finished her whiskey in one swallow. "This is insane," she said. "We're strangers. We've known each other for..." She checked her watch. 4 hours. "This isn't real." "Probably not," Marcus agreed. "But when was the last time you felt anything that was?" She opened her mouth to argue, to rationalize, to retreat behind the walls that had protected her for 6 years. But then his hand moved, just slightly, just enough that his pinky finger brushed against hers on the armrest between them. It was the smallest touch, barely contact at all. But Eleanor's entire body reacted like she'd been struck by lightning. Her breath caught, her pupils dilated, and in that moment she realized something terrifying. She wanted to be unbroken. She wanted it so badly it physically hurt. And the man sitting next to her, this stranger with his own cathedral of scars, seemed to want the same impossible thing. "I live in Seattle," she said quietly. "The flight lands at 3 in the morning. I have a deposition at 9. "I live in Seattle too," Marcus replied. "I have a presentation to a client at 10. "This is insane," he finished. "You said that already. We should be smart about this." "Should we?" Elena turned to face him completely, tucking one leg under her in the cramped seat. Her armor was cracking, fissures spreading across her carefully constructed facade. "Tell me why you think this could possibly work. Give me one logical reason." Marcus set down his empty cup and met her eyes with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "Because I've spent 6 years being logical, being controlled, being safe, and it's made me into something hollow. A man who designs buildings no one wants to live in, and you..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You've done the same thing. Built a life that looks successful from the outside, but feels empty on the inside." "That's not a reason," Elena whispered, but her voice wavered. "You're right," he said. "Here's a reason. I haven't wanted to know someone's story in 6 years. Haven't cared about anyone's pain except my own. But sitting here, listening to you, I feel something I thought was dead." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand deliberately this time. "I feel curious," I feel alive, and I'm terrified of that. But I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the next 6 years wondering what if. A tear slid down Elena's cheek before she could stop it. The first tear she'd cried since Sarah left. She didn't wipe it away. I don't know how to do this, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. Neither do I, Marcus admitted. But maybe... The plane shuddered violently, cutting him off mid-sentence. The seatbelt sign illuminated. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, apologizing for severe unexpected turbulence, instructing everyone to remain seated. But that wasn't what made Elena's blood run cold. It was the way Marcus's hand suddenly gripped hers, not gently but desperately, as if he'd just realized something devastating. His face had gone pale, his breathing shallow. "Marcus," she said, alarm cutting through everything else. "What's wrong?" He was staring past her out the window, but his eyes looked unfocused, seeing something that wasn't there. His grip on her hand tightened until it was almost painful. "Marcus," she repeated louder now, "look at me." And when he finally did, she saw pure fear reflected back at her, and the terrible realization that the person sitting next to her, the one she'd just started letting in, was fracturing right before her eyes. His breathing came in short, sharp gasps now, each inhale sounding like it was being dragged through broken glass. Elena's medical knowledge was limited to courtroom testimony from expert witnesses, but she knew panic when she saw it. She'd just never expected to see it in someone who seemed as fortified as herself. "Marcus, listen to my voice," she said, forcing calm into her tone even as her own heart hammered against her ribs. "You're having a panic attack. You're safe. We're safe." But he wasn't hearing her. His eyes had that terrible vacant quality of someone drowning in their own mind. His free hand clutched at his chest, and Elena realized with a jolt of fear that he might actually be having a heart attack, that this might be medical rather than psychological. She pressed the call button for the flight attendant, then turned back to him, this time gripping both his hands in hers. "Marcus, I need you to breathe with me. In for 4 counts. Can you do that?" Nothing. His pupils were dilated, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cabin air. Elena did something she hadn't done in years. She acted on pure instinct rather than calculation. She pressed her forehead against his, forcing him to feel her presence, her solidity. "I'm here," she whispered. "Whatever you're seeing, it's not real. I'm real. This is real." Something in her words must have penetrated because his eyes suddenly focused on her face, inches from his own. She could feel his breath on her lips, could see the war raging behind his eyes. "The last flight David was on," Marcus managed to choke out. "It crashed. He died. And I couldn't." The world tilted sideways for Elena. Everything that had passed between them suddenly recalibrated, reshaping itself around this new, devastating information. "When?" she breathed. "2 years ago. I told you we broke up. That was true. But 3 months after he left." Marcus's voice cracked. He was flying to document a story about glaciers in Alaska. The plane went down in a storm. Everyone on board died instantly. They said it was quick. Like that makes it better. The flight attendant arrived, her professional smile faltering when she saw Marcus's condition. "Is there a medical emergency? Give us a minute," Elena said with such authority that the woman actually stepped back. "Please." Elena turned back to Marcus, still holding his face close to hers, refusing to let him retreat into whatever dark place was trying to swallow him. "Look at me. Stay with me. We are not crashing. We are not dying. This turbulence is normal. The captain would have told us if there was real danger." "I know that," Marcus gasped. "Logically, I know that. But my body doesn't believe it. Every time I fly now, I'm back in my apartment watching the news, seeing the wreckage spread across a mountain, knowing that the last thing I said to him was, 'I don't love you enough to change.'" knowing that he died believing that. Elena's throat constricted. She understood suddenly and completely why Marcus had said what he'd said earlier about being hollow. This wasn't just about a breakup. This was about unfinished business with a ghost. This was about guilt that had calcified into something unbreakable. "Did you love him?" she asked quietly. Marcus's laugh was raw and painful. "I don't know. I thought I did, but I was so busy protecting myself from feeling too much that I never let myself feel enough, and now I'll never know. That's the real hell of it. I can't even be certain whether I lost something real or just the possibility of something real." The turbulence subsided. The plane leveled out. The seatbelt sign dimmed. Around them, other passengers relaxed, returned to their phones and books and sleep. But in row 12, the storm was just beginning. Elena slowly released his hands, giving him space but staying close. "Is that why you design buildings that look like fortresses? Because you're trying to create something that can't be destroyed the way David was?" Marcus wiped his face with shaking hands, clearly embarrassed by his breakdown, but too exhausted to hide it. "My therapist said the same thing before I fired her. Because she was right? Because I didn't want to hear it." He leaned back, closing his eyes. "I'm sorry. You don't need this. You don't need me falling apart on you 4 hours after we met." But Elena surprised herself by laughing, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and genuine. "Are you kidding? This is the most honest interaction I've had with another human being in 6 years. Everyone else just sees the suit and the closing arguments. You're sitting here bleeding in front of me. That's..." She searched for the word. "That's brave." Marcus opened his eyes, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Brave or broken?" "Maybe they're the same thing," Elena said. "Maybe being broken is what makes it possible to be brave, because what else do we have to lose?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Around them, the mundane sounds of the flight continued. The hum of engines, the rustle of magazines, a baby crying somewhere in the back. But in their small pocket of space, something was shifting, transforming. "I need to tell you something," Elena said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "About Sarah. About why she really left." Marcus waited, giving her the same space she'd given him. "I told you she wanted marriage, kids, the whole domestic dream. That's true. But what I didn't tell you is that she was pregnant when she left." Elena's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "We'd been trying for 6 months, IVF, spent our savings on it, and when it finally worked, when she told me we were going to have a daughter, She stopped, the words catching in her throat like broken glass. "You panicked," Marcus said softly. "Worse. I asked her to wait, said the timing was wrong, that I was up for partner, that we should wait until things settled down." Eleanor's eyes were fixed on the seat in front of her, unable to meet his gaze. She looked at me like I'd stabbed her, said, "There will always be another case, Elena. There will always be another reason to wait. The question is whether you actually want this or just want the idea of it." "What did you say?" "Nothing. I said nothing, and she knew. She knew that my silence was the answer." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "She miscarried 3 weeks later. Stress, the doctor said, and 2 weeks after that she was gone. I sometimes wonder if..." "Don't," Marcus interrupted firmly. "Don't do that to yourself. Miscarriages happen. You can't." "Can't I?" Elena turned to him, and her eyes were fierce now, burning with a pain she'd carried alone for too long. "I can't wonder if my ambition, my fear, my inability to just love her openly and fully contributed to the loss of our child. I can't torture myself with the knowledge that maybe if I'd been different, been better, been brave enough to choose love over fear, that baby would be 4 years old right now." Marcus reached for her hand again, and this time the touch was gentle, grounding. You can wonder. You probably will for the rest of your life. But wondering and knowing are different things. You don't know. You can't know. And punishing yourself for possibilities isn't justice, it's just more pain. Spoken like someone who knows, Elena said, her anger deflating into exhaustion. I've been punishing myself for 2 years, Marcus admitted, telling myself that if I'd been better, kinder, more open, David wouldn't have left, and if he hadn't left, he wouldn't have been on that plane. It's circular logic that goes nowhere except deeper into the dark. They sat in silence. 2 people who'd spent years in their own private purgatories, suddenly finding themselves in the same cell. This is insane, Elena said again, but this time there was something different in her voice, not dismissal, not fear, something closer to wonder. We're both disasters, both carrying around dead weight, both convinced we don't deserve anything good. And yet, Marcus said. And yet, Elena echoed. The plane began its descent into Seattle. The captain's voice announced their arrival, thanked them for their patience with the delays, hoped they'd fly again soon. The cabin lights brightened. People stirred, gathering belongings, checking phones, sliding back into their normal lives. But Marcus and Elena remained still, caught in the gravity of what they'd shared, what they'd confessed, what they'd accidentally built between Gate 47 and Row 12. I don't know what happens next, Elena said as the plane touched down, wheels screeching against runway. I don't know how to do this, any of this. Neither do I, Marcus said. But I know I don't want to walk away without what? He turned to face her fully, and in his eyes she saw something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Without seeing if 2 broken people can make something whole, or at least something honest. The plane taxied to the gate, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Around them, passengers stood, stretching, yawning, eager to escape the cramped confines of the aircraft and return to their regularly scheduled lives. Elena and Marcus remained seated, suspended in indecision and possibility. I have a deposition in, Elena checked her watch, 5 hours and 43 minutes. I have a presentation in 6 hours and 17 minutes, Marcus replied. We should go home, get some sleep, be professionals. We should. Neither of them moved. Or, Elena said slowly, each word feeling like stepping off a cliff, we could get coffee, talk more, see if this, whatever this is, survives outside the weird bubble of airport purgatory and flight confessions. Marcus felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt in 2 years. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too large, too dangerous. But possibility, the smallest seed of possibility. There's a diner, he said, near Pike Place. Opens at 4. They make terrible coffee and amazing pancakes. Terrible coffee sounds perfect, Elena said. And for the first time since Sarah left, she smiled a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and made them look almost soft. They gathered their belongings and moved into the aisle, joining the slow procession toward the exit. But as they stepped into the jet bridge, Marcus's phone buzzed. Then Elena's. Then both phones erupted with notifications, the kind of urgent pinging that meant something significant had happened while they were 30,000 feet above the world. Marcus looked at his screen first, and Elena watched his face go pale again. But this time, it wasn't panic. It was shock. What is it? She asked. He turned the phone toward her and she read the headline that was apparently breaking across every news outlet simultaneously. Major Chicago law firm implicated in fraud scandal. Federal investigations launched. Elena's firm. Her employer of 8 years. The place where she'd sacrificed everything to make partner. She scrolled through the article with numb fingers, reading names she recognized, cases she'd worked on, allegations that made her stomach turn. This can't be real, she whispered, but it was. And as she continued reading, she realized that the deposition she was supposed to give in 5 hours was now irrelevant. The case she'd been working on was part of the fraud. Her entire professional life had just imploded while she was confessing her sins to a stranger at 30,000 feet. She looked up at Marcus, and he was staring at his own phone with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. He met her eyes, and what she saw there made her heart stop. "The client I'm supposed to present to in 6 hours, they just emailed. They're canceling the project. Budget cuts. The building I've spent 2 years designing will never be built." They stood in the jet bridge, buffeted by impatient passengers trying to push past them, their phones still buzzing with the death rattles of their carefully constructed lives. And then, impossibly, Marcus started laughing. Not the bitter laugh of earlier, but something genuine and slightly unhinged. "What the hell are we laughing about?" Elena demanded, but she could feel her own laughter bubbling up, hysterical and liberating. "Because," Marcus said, reaching for her hand as they were swept along by the crowd toward baggage claim, "we just spent 3 hours confessing how we destroyed our lives by choosing our careers over love. And now the universe has apparently decided to take those careers away from us." Elena squeezed his hand, and the laughter turned into something else, something that felt suspiciously like relief. "So we're both unemployed disasters now?" "Looks that way." They emerged into the terminal, and Seattle spread out before them through massive windows. The city they both called home but had never really lived in. Too busy building walls and avoiding feelings and perfecting the art of being alone. "That diner," Elena said, still holding his hand even though they'd left the crowd behind. "Is it still open?" "Should be." "Then let's go. Because apparently, we have nothing but time now." And as they walked toward the exit, toward the uncertain dawn, toward terrible coffee and amazing pancakes, and the terrifying possibility of trying again, Marcus realized something that made him stop walking. Elena turned back, eyebrow raised in question. "I don't have your number," he said. "We've confessed our deepest traumas to each other, but I don't have your phone number." She pulled out her phone, still showing the headlines about her firm's collapse, and handed it to him. "Put yours in. I'll text you." He did, fingers fumbling slightly. When he handed it back, their fingers touched, and neither of them pulled away quickly. "This is crazy," she said for the 3rd time that night. "Completely insane," he agreed, but they were both smiling now, the kind of smiles that people wear when they've just watched their carefully constructed worlds burn down and realized they might be okay with starting over from the ashes. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know as they walked out into the cold Seattle dawn, was that the real story was just beginning, and the confessions they'd shared were only the prologue to something far more complicated than either of them could have imagined. The diner was exactly as Marcus had described, a relic from another era, all cracked vinyl booths and formica tables that had absorbed decades of coffee stains and conversation. At 4:30 in the morning, it held only the lost and the searching. A truck driver nursing black coffee at the counter, 2 nurses still in scrubs sharing a basket of fries, and now Marcus and Elena sitting across from each other in a corner booth with a view of the street where the first hints of dawn were beginning to bruise the sky. The coffee was, as promised, terrible. The pancakes were transcendent. "So," Elena said, pouring an obscene amount of syrup onto her plate, "we're really doing this, sitting in a diner at 4 in the morning, unemployed, traumatized, and..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Free?" Marcus offered. She looked up sharply, ready to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't being glib. He meant it. "Free," she repeated, testing the word in her mouth like something foreign. "I haven't felt free in so long I'm not sure I'd recognize it." "Me neither, but I think..." Marcus cut into his own pancakes with the precision of an architect measuring angles. "I think maybe freedom isn't the absence of weight. It's choosing which weight you want to carry." Elena sat back, coffee cup cradled in both hands, studying him. In the fluorescent diner light, he looked different than he had on the plane. Less guarded. The sharp edges were still there, but they seemed less like weapons and more like scars that had finally started to heal. You're saying we get to choose what we carry now? We always had the choice. We just convinced ourselves we didn't. He met her eyes. I told myself I had to be alone because I'd already destroyed one person who tried to love me, that it was noble somehow to keep everyone at a distance. But really I was just afraid. Afraid that if I let anyone in again, I'd have to admit that David's death wasn't just about him being on that plane. It was about me not giving him enough reasons to stay close. Elena's throat tightened. And now I'm sitting in a diner with someone who understands that fear, who carries the same weight, and instead of it pushing us apart, maybe it could be the thing that lets us be honest with each other. He leaned forward. I don't know what this is, Elena. I don't know if we're headed for disaster or discovery, but I know I want to find out. She should have been terrified. Every logical part of her brain was screaming that this was too fast, too raw, too dangerous. But the logical part of her brain had just spent 8 years building a career at a firm that turned out to be corrupt. Maybe logic was overrated. I need to tell you something else, she said quietly. About Sarah. About the real reason I couldn't commit. Marcus waited, patient as stone. My mother left when I was 7. Just walked out one day, and my father fell apart so completely that I spent the rest of my childhood taking care of him instead of the other way around. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup. I learned early that love makes people weak, that needing someone gives them the power to destroy you. So I built my entire life around not needing anyone. And when Sarah asked me to choose her, to choose us, I couldn't. Not because I didn't love her, but because loving her meant risking becoming my father, broken, helpless, unable to function without the person who left. But she left anyway, Marcus said softly. She left anyway, Elena confirmed, and I became my father after all, just with better lawyers and a corner office. She laughed, but there were tears in her eyes now. I spent 6 years proving I didn't need anyone, and all I proved was that I was exactly as broken as I'd always feared. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, and this time neither of them flinched at the contact. Here's what I've learned in the last 2 years, he said. Being broken isn't the problem. Everyone's broken. Some people just hide it better. The problem is pretending you're not broken while you slowly turn into someone you don't recognize. So what do we do? Elena asked, and the question felt enormous, like she was asking about more than just the two of them in this diner. We stop pretending, Marcus said simply. We stop performing strength we don't feel and building walls we don't need. We show up as we actually are, damaged, uncertain, scared, and we see if that's enough. What if it's not? Then at least we tried. At least we were honest. He squeezed her hand. I'm tired of living in monuments to dead things, Elena. I want to build something alive, even if it's messy and imperfect and might fall apart. The sun was fully rising now, painting the Seattle streets in shades of gold and amber. The city was waking up, and somewhere out there, their old lives were continuing to crumble. Her firm being investigated, his project being cancelled, all the carefully constructed facades they'd spent years building now revealed as hollow. And yet, sitting in this diner with terrible coffee and incredible pancakes, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. The sense that maybe the story wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. I think I need to call Sarah, she said suddenly. Not to try to fix things or get back together, but to apologize, really apologize, for not being brave enough to love her the way she deserved. Marcus nodded. I need to visit David's grave. I haven't been since the funeral. I couldn't face it. Couldn't face the fact that the last conversation we had was me telling him I wasn't capable of the kind of love he needed. And now I think maybe I need to tell him I'm trying to learn, that I'm scared and I'll probably mess it up, but I'm going to try. He looked at Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. We don't get do-overs, but we get do-difference. We get to take everything we learned from breaking and use it to build something new. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their confession settling around them like snow. So what happens after pancakes? Elena asked, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy moment. We both go home to our empty apartments and figure out our next moves. We could, Marcus said. Or, Pike Place Market opens at 6. We could walk, watch the city wake up, talk about things that don't hurt, learn each other in daylight instead of in the dark confessional of an airplane. He paused. No pressure, no promises, just two people who've spent too long being alone, choosing not to be alone for a few more hours. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the guarded stranger from the airport, but someone who was choosing vulnerability over safety, someone who was as scared as she was but doing it anyway. Okay, she said, but I need to know something first. Anything. If we do this, if we actually try to build something together, you have to promise me you won't run when I get scared. Because I will get scared. I'll push you away and test you and try to prove that you're going to leave anyway, so I might as well end it first. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his entire face. I promise I won't run. But you have to promise me the same thing, because I'll pull away and go silent and build walls right in front of you, and you'll have to decide whether you want to climb them or tear them down. Deal, Elena said, and the word felt like a vow. They paid the bill and stepped out into the morning. Seattle stretched before them, the market district coming alive with vendors and tourists, and the timeless rhythm of a city that had seen countless broken people try to put themselves back together. As they walked, their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Neither of them spoke for several blocks, content to simply exist in each other's presence without the weight of explanation or expectation. It was Elena who finally broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you think we would have found each other if our lives hadn't fallen apart? If my firm hadn't imploded and your project hadn't been cancelled? If we'd just been two random people on a flight, would we have even talked? Marcus considered this. Honestly, probably not. I would have put on my headphones and avoided eye contact for 3 hours. You would have worked on your laptop and pretended the rest of the world didn't exist. So maybe... Elena paused at a corner, turning to face him. Maybe we needed to fall apart to find each other. Or maybe, Marcus countered gently, we were already falling apart, and finding each other is what finally gave us permission to admit it. The market was opening, vendors arranging flowers in explosive bursts of color, fishmongers shouting their morning greetings, the smell of fresh bread wafting from nearby bakeries. Life in all its chaotic, beautiful messiness. They stopped at a flower stall, and Marcus bought a single stem, a dark red rose, nearly black at the edges. He handed it to Elena with a self-conscious shrug. For new beginnings, and old endings, and everything in between. She took it, studying the imperfect bloom with its slightly wilted petals and thorns that hadn't been trimmed away. It's not perfect, she observed. Neither are we, Marcus said. But maybe that's the point. They continued walking, and as the morning grew brighter, something shifted between them. The desperate confession of the plane gave way to something softer, more sustainable. They talked about small things, favorite books, childhood pets, the best pizza in Seattle. They learned each other's laughter, discovered shared tastes in music, debated the merits of pineapple on pizza, with the passion of people who were practicing intimacy through argument. By the time they reached the waterfront, the sun was fully up, glinting off Elliott Bay in diamonds of light. Ferries moved across the water like slow dancers, Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries mixing with the sounds of the waking city. "I should probably go home," Elena said, but she didn't move. "Figure out what happens next with my career, my life, all of it." "You should," Marcus agreed, also not moving. "Will I see you again?" The question came out smaller than she intended, vulnerable in a way that made her want to take it back. Marcus turned to face her fully, framing her face with his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Elena Marsh, corporate litigator turned unemployed disaster, I would like to take you to dinner. Somewhere with better coffee than that diner, but worse pancakes, because those are impossible to beat. I would like to hear more stories about your life, the good ones and the terrible ones. I would like to introduce you to my nightmares and my hopes, and see if they're compatible with yours." "That's a lot for a first date," she said, but she was smiling through the tears. "Then let's call it a second date. The plane was the first. This morning was the intermission. Dinner can be Act 2. She laughed, and the sound was lighter than anything she'd produced in years. "Okay, yes, dinner. But Marcus, I know," he said. "We're both disasters. We're both broken. We might break each other. This might be the worst idea either of us has ever had. And I've spent 2 years playing it safe, and safe has made me into a ghost." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers just like she'd done on the plane when he was drowning in panic. "I'd rather be a disaster with you than safe and alone anymore." Elena closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't the kind of kiss that happens in movies, perfectly choreographed and sweeping. It was tentative and slightly awkward. Two people who'd forgotten how to be vulnerable learning the language again. But it was real. It was honest. And when they pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "This is insane," Elena said one final time. "Completely," Marcus agreed. But they were both smiling now, standing on a Seattle waterfront at 7 in the morning, holding each other like lifelines. Two people who'd spent years convincing themselves they were better off alone, discovering that maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong. The city moved around them, joggers passing by, coffee shops opening their doors, the endless rhythm of people starting their days. And in that moment, Marcus and Elena were just two more people in that rhythm, no longer trying to stand apart from it, but allowing themselves to be part of it. They exchanged phone numbers properly this time, laughing at the absurdity of it. They'd confessed their deepest traumas to each other, but had almost forgotten to make sure they could find each other again. Elena called a rideshare, and they stood together waiting, neither wanting to be the first to let go. "Tonight?" Marcus asked. "For dinner?" "Tonight," Elena confirmed. "But Marcus, I'm going to be scared. I'm probably going to try to sabotage this." "I know, and I'm probably going to do the same thing." He kissed her forehead. "But we'll do it together. That's the deal." The car arrived. Elena climbed in, then rolled down the window. "Hey," she called as Marcus stepped back onto the sidewalk. "Yeah?" "Thank you for being broken in the same way I'm broken, for making me feel less alone." Marcus smiled, and in the morning light, he looked younger, less burdened. "Thank you for reminding me that being broken doesn't mean being beyond repair." The car pulled away, and Marcus stood watching until it disappeared around a corner. Then he pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He looked up directions to the cemetery where David was buried. It was time to say goodbye properly. Time to thank him for trying to love someone who didn't know how to be loved. Time to tell him that he was trying to learn, that he'd met someone who understood his darkness but didn't want to live in it forever. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to forgive himself. Meanwhile, across the city, Elena sat in the back of the rideshare, the black rose Marcus had given her resting in her lap. She pulled out her phone and found Sarah's number. Still saved. Still there after all these years. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Elena's heart hammered. She was about to hang up when a familiar voice answered, cautious and questioning. "Sarah," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "It's me. I know I have no right to call, but I need to tell you something. I need to tell you that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to see it before you left." There was a long pause, and then Sarah's voice, softer now. "Elena, I've been waiting for this call for 6 years. Could 2 people who've spent years building walls around their hearts ever tear them down for each other?" The answer, it turned out, wasn't simple. It wasn't about tearing down walls in a single dramatic moment. It was about choosing every day to remove 1 brick at a time. To show up broken but willing. To risk everything on the possibility that being honest about your damage was braver than pretending you didn't carry any. Marcus and Elena's story didn't end that morning in Seattle. It was just beginning. There would be fights and setbacks, moments when old fears resurface and old patterns try to reassert themselves. There would be days when they both wondered if it would be easier to go back to being alone. But they would also have mornings like this one, full of terrible coffee and incredible pancakes, and the revolutionary act of letting someone see you as you actually are. They would build something together, not despite being broken, but because of it. Because sometimes the only people who can help you heal are the ones who carry their own scars. And somewhere in that truth lives a question worth asking. What if the thing we fear most, being fully seen in all our damage and imperfection, is actually the only thing that can save us? What if love isn't about finding someone who completes us, but finding someone brave enough to be incomplete alongside us? The sun continued its rise over Seattle, indifferent to their stories, to their pain, to their tentative hope. The city carried on, holding millions of other stories, other people choosing between safety and risk, between walls and bridges, between the comfort of isolation and the terror of connection. And in that great mosaic of human experience, 2 broken people had found each other and decided that broken together was better than whole alone. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected, but maybe, just maybe, it was the one they needed.